As a follow-up to the painting desk I made my wife previously, this is a storage rack for all of her paints. It'll store about 72 of the little mini paints, as well as room for all her brushes so the cat doesn't chew on the ends of them. Now, free plans, drawings, basic drawings in the description below if you want to make your own one of these. At this stage, I haven't seen the final product. You probably have in the video intro, but all I've got to work on is this prototype. The prototype lets me see the overall dimensions, get the feel of it, make sure that it's what Nat actually wants. She's got a couple of different brands of paint, and they come in a couple of different sizes. These three are pretty similar, but not identical, but this one is way off. So she'll fit 3 of those in any one row and 4 of these in any one row. Kind of works out well for the paints that she has. This prototype, however, is just very crudely made plywood with butt joins and hot glue. It works really well for getting something physical to test the overall dimensions, the look and the feel, that sort of stuff. So wasn't worthless, but is very, very crude. So now I have to build the real things. I started by ripping down the cover sheet of plywood into 2 long strips. Strip 1 is 50mm wide, this will form the vertical sections. Strip 2 is 40mm wide, which will form the horizontal sections. The vertical sections need 2 dados to accept the current and previous shelf. The router bit I'm using is just a hair under the thickness of the plywood, so I need to move the fence over very slightly and perform a second pass. Notice the way the fence needs to move back so this doesn't suddenly become climb cut. The second dado is much closer to the edge on the opposite face. The same 2 passes are needed, but not shown. It was much easier to get the dados in the long strip than cut everything down. Each section gets cut into a 100mm length. There are 4 vertical sections and 3 horizontal sections for each paint rack. The very front vertical section gets cut down to remove the dado for the previous shelf, since that doesn't exist. The glue up is very straightforward. Glue in the dados, shelf in the dado, blue tape to hold it all together. Blue tape is sufficient for clamping, we're not building houses here. While the glue dried, I ripped down more plywood for what would become the sides. Each square yields 2 sides, but I need them on an angle of about 14 degrees. I used a small triangular shim which I double-sided taped to my crosscut sled, then I could easily cut the long triangles. This was safer than using a miter saw. The glue-up process is much the same, just making sure that some of the key components sit flat. The initial glue-up is just flexible enough to be bent into shape. For the brush tray, the front, back and sides receive a small dado for the base. For the brush holder itself, a series of 8mm holes are drilled. There are 2 of these offset slightly from each other. The plywood is then ripped to cut the holes in half. The brush holders are glued directly onto the base of the tray. I'm using dots of superglue to act as the clamp, and the PVA for the actual glue strength. The superglue dries quickly, holding it all in place. Now that the paint racks and the brush tray is all done, I can work on the cabinet that's going to house everything. One of the eternal arguments my wife and I always seem to get into is that whenever I'm building something for her, she doesn't want it too fancy and doesn't want it to be too much work for me to do. My argument is if she wants something custom and I'm going to the effort to make it crappy, I may as well go to the effort to make it kind of okay. In this case, she very clearly specified that the paint holder things shouldn't be too fancy and they should be from like cover sheets of plywood, which is what these are. However, the cabinet itself, she didn't specify. She just left that to my own devices, so to speak. So for the cabinet, I'm going to be using some Quarter Sawn Vic Ash. The last of the hardwood that I have, which I wasn't allowed to use on her desk and made a lot more work for me because I had to reclaim timber and all of that to get that to work. But this time she loses because she wasn't specific enough. For the joinery of the cabinet box thing, I'm going to go with box joints. They're pretty easy, they're pretty quick, and they don't look half bad. I'm using the Incra iBox here at the table saw, and I have a box join blade in set to the 3/8 setting, so there's two dado blades that interlock to give you different widths. I've already done my test cut, and the results are pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I've marked my workpieces with a 1 and a 2. The 1s are the vertical pieces, the 2s are the horizontal pieces, and it just affects the initial setup when you're cutting the box joins with this jig. It's not a big deal, but there is just a bit of a knack to getting that all set up. I've marked the two pieces that need the stopped groove with up and out, so I know which way they're going, and that reveals that one of these grooves needs to be a plunge cut and pushed forward, the other one will be pushed forward and then stopped. So it's important to mark out on the fence properly for where the start and stop points are. So the easy way to do that is to close the fence up if it's a split fence, butt your workpiece up against it and the cutter, and with a piece of masking tape I've marked the start, flip to the other side, mark the stop. On one side we'll need to plunge down and start the cut that way. On the other piece, this workpiece, we can push forward and stop when we get to the corresponding marks. These will only need to go within 15 mil, 20 mil of the leading edge of the piece. So I can mark that on the top side, push forward and just wait till it lines up with my marks. Pretty easy, just needs that little bit of extra preparation. There's not much left to do other than glue up the box And I want to talk just very quickly about that. On each corner there are 16 fingers locking together. So all up, that's quite a few surfaces grinding against each other. So any time I've been doing a dry fit, I've been having to use a mallet. When you add glue, a water-based glue, those joints swell, and that can be even harder to get everything seated nicely. The solution I'm going for is going to be using liquid hide glue. I've got it on hand. It's really good for this sort of application because it's not water-based. It will lubricate the joint and things should go together possibly easier than by hand, which could be nice. Alternatively, you could use epoxy, which again isn't water-based, so it should lubricate the joint. You want a thin viscosity epoxy rather than a really thick one for that. Or you could use polyurethane glues. I don't have any of them and I haven't used them, so it's not really an option in this case. If you are set on using a PVA like Titebond Original or whatever, you might want to make some sort of finger joint spreader so it actually puts the glue in all the joints very quickly so that you can get them together quickly so that they don't have time to swell all that much. For me though, hide glue works really well. So this is really just a glorified box with the top and bottom not on. This will be hard up against the wall, so it doesn't really matter that there's a massive gap in the back. It's structurally sound enough for these little pots of paint. She'll be able to store 72 of these paints, though a little bit less if she goes for these Citadel brand paints. But since she's still in the process of learning painting, we don't really know what paints she's going to end up with. So that's one reason why these little paint holders aren't, heirloom grade paint holders, because they'll probably get replaced in 6 months when she finds a new brand that she likes a lot more. This is actually quite a fun project. I was surprised how enjoyable it was making these little paint racks, and just made the wife happy. And I won an argument, though I think I lost the war on that because now I have less material for things that I want to make. Thanks for watching.